Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that made many medieval girls nervous. Their wedding night. Not because of candlelight or romance, but because no one told them what to expect. You're about to get married, not to a prince, but to the miller's son from 3 houses down. So before you settle in for the night, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I always find it fascinating to see who's joining this sleepy little journey worldwide. Now, turn off the lights, switch on a soft fan if you like that gentle hum, and let's slip quietly into tonight's story. Tonight is your last night sleeping in the house you've known all your life. The thatched roof leaks in one corner. The lumpy earth walls slope slightly inward, and a faint firewood scent lingers. Your mother is folding the wedding dress, a coarse, patched garment, but the finest your family owns. Your father is wiping down a rickety wooden chair, a parting gift for your dowry. And you're just sitting there, holding an old handkerchief, between nervousness and not knowing what to feel. All-day neighbors passed by with comments. Ready to be the miller's wife? Someone teased. Another winked. Don't forget to bite your pillow tomorrow night. You smiled politely, nodded, and laughed a little. Everyone acts like it's all so normal. But to you it's not. You've met him a few times. He's not cruel, not unkind, just distant. And soon you'll share a bed, a home, a life. You've never been alone with a man. You'll be alone with one for the rest of your life. In your village, weddings aren't grand 3-day festivals. You'll wear that dress tomorrow morning and walk to the little churchyard. The priest will say a blessing. The families will trade a few solemn promises. Then people will clap, pass around beer and call it a day. There will be bread, porridge, maybe meat if someone's lucky. Then comes the giving away. The walk to your husband's home, through the village, past every pair of watching eyes. You've heard of villages where they still do the bedding ceremony, where people shove the new couple into a room, toss a blanket over them, and shut the door like they're storing 2 chickens for the night. You hope your village isn't one of those. Tonight, you lie in your childhood bed, fresh straw, still scratchy. Sleep doesn't come easily. There's too much in your head. Your mother said, "Don't worry. Everyone has a first time." But no one ever says exactly what first time really means. You think of the whispers you've heard from older girls. Some say it's over quickly if you close your eyes. Others laugh. It's like being flattened by a sack of wet flour. You can't tell what's true. What's a joke? No one seems thrilled. You're not afraid of him. You're afraid of being expected to give something you're not ready to give. But everyone expects you to do it well. Your family, your village, even your future husband. Your mother has gone to bed. Your father is already snoring. Your younger brother kicked your foot in his sleep. The world seems normal. Only you feel out of place. Tomorrow, everything changes. You'll no longer be the daughter of this house. You'll be someone's wife. You'll sleep in a different room, cook, clean, and, if fate allows, bear children. Everyone says you should be happy. But right now, you're just tired. You pull the blanket up to your chin, eyes open, staring at the roof. There's a small hole you never noticed before. Moonlight slips through it like a pale ribbon. You whisper to yourself, "Just get through tomorrow." That's all. You don't hope for magic. Just that your husband will be gentle. He won't be drunk. That he understands you're nervous too. Eventually, you drift into sleep, not dreaming. Just the light, flickering sleep of a girl who knows that tomorrow she'll wake up to a life entirely new. And she hopes, somehow, she'll manage it. The next morning, You wake when the sky is still misty. The rooster hasn't crowed more than once or twice before your mother urges you up. Today is your wedding day, and the first order of business is washing your face in a basin of water cold as ice outside. You brush your teeth with your finger or a sprig of basil, depending on whether anyone remembered to pick it that morning. Then your mother hands you the wedding dress. Just your everyday dress, patched more carefully, smoothed out a bit better, and tied with a strip of fabric at the waist to look formal. There's no veil, no music, no one does your makeup. Just the rustle of straw underfoot and the whispers of a few neighbor women walking past. She's grown up fast, hasn't she? Hope the husband's decent. Yeah, 'cause that mother-in-law's a piece of work. You pretend not to hear. The family eats a breakfast of thin porridge. No one says much. Your mother watches you a little longer than usual. Your father nods. He's never been good with words. But he carved you a new pair of wooden shoes. And that's enough. When the time comes, you follow your mother to the little churchyard at the edge of the village. The priest is already there, holding his book of rites, his expression neither solemn nor joyful. Your groom is waiting too, in a shirt specially washed the day before. He looks at you and nods. You nod back. No one smiles, but no one seems sad either. The ceremony is quick. A few prayers, a few promises. No rings. Each of you holds a sprig of dry grass as a symbol. For the land, the village, for the future, the priest says. You're unsure you believe in the future, but you nod anyway. There's clapping. Children shriek. Someone starts pouring malt beer into wooden cups. And just like that, you're married. The wedding feast is a long table set up outside. There's toasted bread, a pot of cabbage soup, and a plate of salt-cured meat sliced thin as paper. Some folks bring their baked goods, a few a little burnt on the edges, but no one complains. Kids run around screaming, losing shoes, bumping into grown-ups, and laughing. You sit through the feast, barely eating, hearing the usual kinds of well wishes. Take it easy tonight. Congrats. Time to learn how to be a mother. Don't get on the mother-in-law's bad side. She's famous. You smile politely. Every comment feels like a warning wrapped in congratulations. Your mother-in-law approaches. She's taller than you expected, her hair tied tight, holding a small bundle. Things a girl needs, she says shortly, handing you the bundle. Inside, a square of white cloth, a small bottle of linseed oil, and a sheet to spread on the bed. You don't ask. She doesn't explain. It's all understood. No words necessary. By evening, the sky darkens, and the guests begin to leave. You say goodbye to each one. Some kiss your forehead. Some slap your husband's shoulder with a few murmured comments. Everyone seems cheerful. No one asks if you're okay. You follow your husband to your new home, just a few minutes' walk from the old one. It's a small wooden house with a kitchen area and a bed in the corner. There's already bread on the table and a pot of chicken porridge, gone cold. You step inside. He follows, closes the door. For the first time, the two of you are alone. No flowers, no music, just soft footsteps and quiet, awkward breaths. Are you hungry? He asks. You shake your head. I'm not good with words, he says, but I won't hurt you. You nod. That helps you breathe a little easier. You sit at the edge of the bed. The straw is clean but still scratchy. The blanket stiff. Candlelight flickers against the wooden walls. The room is quiet. No one is rushing you. No one is watching. No dreaded bedding ceremony after all. He sits beside you, silent. I'm scared too, he admits. You turn to look at him. Really? Yeah. You're a stranger to me. but I'll try to learn how not to make you feel like one forever. You don't know how to answer that. But for the first time all day, you smile. Just a little. But it's real. That night, you don't remember every detail. Just that there was hesitation, nervousness, cold sweat. But no one was hurt. No one cried. And when the two of you lay beside each other, not yet used to each other's warmth, not yet knowing who snores, you felt something new. Not quite love, not happiness, but a beginning. You don't know what tomorrow will bring, but tonight, you're no longer afraid. The next morning, you wake up in an unfamiliar but not frightening space. The sun hasn't fully risen yet. Dim light filters through the gaps in the wooden shutters, casting a pale glow across the smoke-darkened ceiling. Your husband is asleep, snoring softly, lying on his side, hair tousled like he's just wrestled with the hay. You shift, and the straw under your back rustles, a few stalks poking through your shirt. Uncomfortable, but something you're starting to get used to. You look around. The room is still small, and the wooden walls are thin, but something about it feels less tense today. It could be because yesterday passed without disaster. No shouting. No one demanded a stained bedsheet as proof. None of the awkward scenes you'd heard whispered about. You get up quietly. The bed, if it can be called that, is just a low wooden frame topped with a mound of hay, covered by a linen blanket. No soft mattress, no fluffy pillows. Each of you has one thin, heavy cover, like a damp cloak. Beneath the hay are a few old, fraying burlap sacks. It smells slightly musty, slightly earthy. Not pleasant, but not unbearable either. You fetch water from the jar outside and wash your face. The cold stings your skin, wakes you up fully. When you come back inside, he's already sitting up. You're both still a little awkward, but he smiles. You smile back. "I think we should stuff more straw into the bed," he says, scratching his head. You nod. "I thought wedding beds were supposed to be softer." "Yeah, well, we didn't get married in a castle." You both laugh. The rest of the morning is spent adjusting the bed, fluffing the hay, laying extra cloth beneath, and shaking out a few stray twigs. It's not what anyone would call romantic, but it's your first time doing something together, and that makes it feel okay. Then comes the part no one prepared you for. Who washes the blanket? Who fetches water? Who handles meals? Turns out, it's you. Your mother-in-law stops by mid-morning. She checks the clothes you received yesterday, glances at them, nods, and says nothing. Then she points toward the hearth, the ash bucket, the water pail. "From now on, you keep this house running," she says. "He'll be off grinding grain. You take care of everything else." It's simple. Simple doesn't mean easy. Your first meal in your new home is thin porridge and stale bread. No one complains. No one compliments it either. Your husband finishes eating, washes his bowl, and heads to the mill. You sit for a while, looking at the freshly fluffed straw bed, then slowly tidying the kitchen. That evening, the two of you talked more. Still in short sentences, still a bit shy, but easier now. He tells you how the grinding stone got jammed by a rock. You tell him you almost cooked ash thinking it was salt. You both laugh. The bed still isn't soft. The added cloth helps, but your side still aches if you lie too long. You think to yourself, "I'll get used to it." That night, you slept on the right side. He sleeps on the left. Neither of you touches the other. Not because you don't want to, but because it's still new. In the days that follow, you begin to understand. There's no such thing as a magical wedding night. There's just the start of a new rhythm, where you learn how to live beside another person, from sleeping and eating, to washing, to the quiet sighs at the end of the day. And somehow, That bed becomes the center of it all. The place where you peel chestnuts together in the evening. The place where you mend torn sleeves. The place where he sits to rub his feet after work. The place where you stare at a flickering candle and think about your mother. The bed isn't wide, it isn't soft, but it holds the sound of breathing, a hand that brushes yours in sleep, the occasional chuckle when one of you dreams something strange. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, you realize you're no longer afraid of the night. Gradually, you begin to adjust to your new rhythm of life, waking early, cooking porridge, hauling water, clearing ashes from the hearth, tending the chickens. Your husband leaves early to grind grain, returning at dusk covered in dust and the scent of wheat. Life isn't easy, but it's not as harsh as the stories you once heard. Until one day you go to church like any other Sunday. The priest, who usually drones on and sometimes dozes off mid-sermon, suddenly speaks clearly on a topic that makes your heart skip a beat: marital relations. Dear brothers and sisters, he says, the marital bed is sacred, but must be approached with the right timing, the right intent, and the right conduct. Your heart beats a little faster. He continues, it is not permitted every night. There are forbidden days, forbidden seasons. Those who disobey risk having their names written in the book of divine thunder. You glance at your husband. He's bowing his head, his expression calm, as if the priest were discussing the harvest. After Mass, you quietly ask an older woman, who has 3 children and 8 grandchildren, do you understand what Father meant? She chuckles. Of course. Basically, you're only supposed to be close on days that aren't Wednesdays, Fridays, holy days, days of fasting, Lent, Advent, and not before going to Mass. Your eyes widen. So, what's left? She shrugs. Maybe Tuesday, if it doesn't rain. You think she's joking, but soon realize no one is truly sure. Some say it should only be done at night. Others insist it's best between the church bells. One woman mumbles, if it feels too good, it's a sin. You return home full of questions. Your husband notices your silence and asks, something wrong? You reply, do you know if today's an approved day? He blinks. Approved for what? You know. He scratches his head, hesitant. Not sure. But I don't think we did anything wrong. You sigh. Not out of anger, just not knowing who to ask. Everyone speaks in riddles. There's no manual. Just vague warnings like, pace yourself, or it's a saint's month, don't get carried away. Then comes the matter of confession. One time, during Lent, you go to confess, and the priest gets oddly specific. Have you and your husband remained temperate? Have you done anything excessive? Did you respect the holy days? You blush and stammer. I think, yes, Father. He pauses, then says, be careful. Don't let the flesh overshadow the spirit. You leave the confessional puzzled, wondering what it means for flesh to overshadow the spirit. At home, you tell your husband. He listens, quiet, then says, I think, as long as we live decently, work hard, and harm no one, we're doing all right. You nod. It's a simple answer, but somehow comforting. A few days later, your mother-in-law stops by. She leans in and whispers, don't be with him on St. Paul's feast day. My sister did, and her baby was born with a twisted tongue. You thank her, though you're unsure how feast days relate to speech impediments. Then she adds, if things ever feel off, boil mint leaves and soak your feet before bed. Helps a lot. You nod and commit it to memory. You're not sure how it all connects, but you remember anyway. You realize that intimacy is something everyone goes through, yet no one talks about openly. Some treat it with great solemnity. Others ignore it completely. But everyone agrees. Whatever you do, don't let anyone know. So you learn to be discreet. You quietly count days. Quietly recall the priest's words. Quietly listen for bad days. And quietly smile when your husband asks, "Wait, is today Friday?" You're no longer afraid like before, but you still can't fully relax. Because now, every time you think about intimacy, you have to think about the church calendar. Married life was never simple, but those days, it came with a list of taboos longer than the tax rolls. After a few weeks of being a wife, you slowly realize the most interesting part isn't the bedroom. It's the advice. Not from books, not from the priest, but from the women of the village, the aunts, the grannies, the neighbor ladies with serious faces and soft voices that never lack conviction. It all began when you stopped by the mill to borrow a basket. As soon as you stepped into the yard, the blacksmith's wife looked you up and down and said, as if reading your thoughts, "Sleeping well, dear?" You were startled. Yes, I think so." She nodded, leaned closer, and whispered, "Listen to me. If your husband turns his back while sleeping, it's a bad sign. Rub his back 3 times, gently and evenly." You blinked. Rub? 3 times? Evenly? Before you could ask, she had already gone inside, leaving you standing there with the basket and a head full of new questions. Another day, while washing vegetables at the well, the woman from the house across the way approached. "I heard you're newly married," she said. You nodded. "Remember, if you want a son quickly, never sleep with the bed facing west during a full moon. It must face southeast. That's the direction of life." You went home and immediately checked the bed. It was pushed up against the wall, the headboard pointing directly west. You looked at your husband, busy peeling a turnip, then looked back at the bed. You said nothing, but that night, the two of you moved it. No one asked why. Lately, you've started collecting these tips like people gather herbs. Every day brings a new one. From the fishmonger. Always place your shoes face down before bed. If they're facing up, you'll dream of demons. From the widow at the edge of town. If your husband snores too loud, don't shake him. Just clear your throat. He'll roll over. From an old woman with no name. Soak your feet in mugwort water once a month. It keeps a woman's fire strong. You have no idea what keeping the fire means, but you still do it. The warmth after soaking is enough to convince you. One day, your mother stops by with a sack of dried sweet potatoes and her usual cautious gaze. After a few polite questions, she asks, "Does he treat you well?" You nod. "Very well, Mama." She exhales in relief. "Then remember, don't eat too much garlic. Men don't like the smell." You chuckle and fold up the garlic you'd been drying on the table. No significant loss. One evening, while drying your hair outside, the aunt next door leans over the fence and says in a low voice, "You're young. You need to conserve your strength. Your husband may be eager, but you have to learn how to say no. Don't always say yes. Sometimes say, 'I have a headache tonight.'" You blush. It sounds silly and strangely practical at the same time. She says, "Just because people say a wife must obey doesn't mean anything goes." Number A. Wife also sets the rules. Gently, of course. You nod, and for the first time you feel a little lighter. No one had ever told you that obedience didn't mean silent suffering. Another day, as you're washing blankets, a slightly older woman comes to help. She was widowed after a mill accident, so her words carry unexpected weight. While wringing out a blanket, she says, "At first, everyone worries, but you'll get used to it. Don't expect the first time to be perfect. Living together for a long time, that's when love grows. Like this blanket. It softens after many washes. You look at the wet, heavy cloth in your hands and smile. That you understand. So each passing day, you collect little advice. Whispered sayings, strange tips. Things that sound silly but somehow ease your heart. Not because you believe all of it, but because it reminds you you're not alone. It turns women confused, nervous, unsure, just like you. And they survived. Not perfectly, but enough to pass on what no one ever teaches. That night, as you lie in bed and look at your sleeping husband, you remember something the vegetable lady once said. Sleep beside someone long enough, and they become familiar. What matters is that you feel at peace. You pull the blanket up, blow out the lamp, and for the first time, feel genuinely at ease. You thought that after getting married, at the very least, you'd have a bit of privacy, a quiet corner to breathe, a moment to be yourself without someone watching, asking, or commenting. But you quickly discover, in the Middle Ages, privacy is about as rare as a goose feather pillow. You've heard of it, but it's probably not for you. Your house, your husband's house, is about the size of a modern kitchen. Just one room is divided into two parts, the hearth on the left and the bed on the right. In between, a table that serves as a dining table, a mending bench, and a towel rack. Near the door sits a water barrel, a hook for hanging pans, and a cat that seems to sleep permanently on the chair. No walls, no curtains, no door to separate one space from another. Everything is open, just like the life you've now stepped into. And if you thought, at least the nights will be quiet, then you haven't met your mother-in-law, who likes to stop by at dusk with bread, firewood, and a few stories to share. Ran into old Tam today, she says with a grin. She said my son's looking very healthy these days. She laughs, not even trying to hide the insinuation. You smile politely, your hand tightening around the soup ladle. Your husband scratches his head, clearly embarrassed. You glance past your mother-in-law at the bed behind her and silently beg, "Please, just go home." But she stays, nibbling porridge and chatting about wheat, the market, and how the neighbor got bitten on the bottom by a snake. She talks about everything, except what you need to hear most right now. When will you leave so I can breathe? Some days, it's relatives who drop in. The kids dive onto the bed like it's a trampoline. One girl, maybe 6 years old, giggles and asks, "Auntie, why does your bed shake? Is there a ghost?" You smile weakly, trying not to blush. When evening comes and everyone's gone, the house goes quiet again. But instead of feeling private, it feels hollow. As if the room echoed with footsteps, laughter, and those glances. People kept glancing at the tiny bed in the corner. And that's when it hits you. Everyone knows your business here. And everyone thinks they have the right to know more. One day you're drawing water from the well. The old woman next door leans in and whispers, "Saw your house light still on late last night." You smile politely. But inside you're thinking, "I just forgot to blow the candle out." Another time, while hanging blankets to dry, a neighbor sidles up and asks, "Does your husband kick the covers in his sleep? Mine used to fling his legs like a donkey every night." You shake your head. But that night when your husband shifts a bit too strongly, you sit bolt upright like you've been summoned. That's when you realize your privacy doesn't depend on doors. It depends on whether people will stop prying into every corner of your married life. Even the church isn't safe. One day the priest gives a sermon about household order and says, "A wise wife preserves her virtue and does not disturb her neighbors with unnecessary sounds." You nearly choked on holy water. You're unsure if the priest speaks generally or aims at a particular house. But a few heads in the pews turn toward you. Honestly, you want to crawl under the kneeling bench. Eventually, you begin to adapt. You shut the door firmly at night. You hang a thick cloth in front of it to muffle sounds. You push the heavy trunk against the bed like a makeshift wall. Do not block your husband. Block the outside world from creeping into your mind. Sometimes you and he lie there. No talking, no touching. Just the sound of the wind against the walls, and the peace of not being asked, not being watched. And in that moment, you exhale. Even in this tiny, noisy, shared house, if you both understand each other, then even a single narrow bed can become a private space. And you find yourself thinking, maybe absolute privacy isn't about being alone. It's about being with someone who doesn't make you pretend. One morning, as you were soaking your hands in ash water to wash a cloth, your mother-in-law walked in and asked a question that nearly made you drop the basin. "Where's the white cloth, dear?" You froze. "What cloth?" She continued, her tone calm and steady. "The one I gave you on your wedding day. You remember it?" You did remember. A small linen square, folded into quarters, was handed over along with a flask of oil. She hadn't explained much at the time. You hadn't dared to ask. You hesitated. "I haven't used it yet." She frowned slightly but said nothing more. She just added some wood to the stove and muttered, "Keep it safe. You might need it." You thought about that cloth all day, not because of its value. It was thin, old, and the edges frayed, but because of the meaning everyone silently attached to it. You'd heard the village women whisper about presenting the white cloth. After the wedding night, if there was blood on it, it was proof that the bride was pure. If not, there would be questions. No one would ask outright, but you'd feel it. Some families even hung the cloth outside to dry in public, like a declaration, as if intimacy were something to be aired out on a line. You sighed. Thankfully, your husband's family hadn't done that. At least not yet. Still, you couldn't shake the feeling that someone was waiting. Waiting to see if you had passed. Waiting for proof that even you weren't sure you wanted to provide. While you were mending a torn sleeve one afternoon, your sister visited. She glanced around and quietly asked, "Did your in-laws ask about the cloth?" You nodded slightly. She shook her head and sighed. "When it was my turn, my mother-in-law took mine to the priest, asked him to pray for purity. I've never been so humiliated in my life." You looked at her. Then both of you burst into laughter. I laughed not because it was funny, but because somehow it still happened. After she left, you took the cloth out of the chest, folded it neatly. Not because you planned to use it, but because you didn't want it to disappear. In a world where everything is scrutinized, your gaze, your bed sheets, sometimes keeping just one thing for yourself is enough. That night, you lay on the edge of the bed. Wind slipped through the cracks and snuffed out the oil lamp. You and your husband lay in silence. After a while, he whispered, "Did my mother say something?" You nodded. "About the cloth?" You nodded again. He sighed. "I'm sorry." You turned to look at him, not surprised. It was the first time he'd apologized for something that wasn't his fault. He added, "I don't care about that stuff. The old folks, they're stuck in their ways." You smiled softly. "I don't care either. It's just funny." "Funny how?" "Funny that they think one piece of fabric can speak for everything." He nodded, then smirked. "So, should we use it to wipe the table?" You laughed. Let's save it. For blowing our noses." Both of you laughed again. Quietly, but enough to make sleep come easier. The next morning, you tucked the cloth deeper into the chest. Not because you were afraid someone might take it, but you knew if anyone asked, you wouldn't have to answer. What happens between two people doesn't belong in the village square. and you started to realize that not all pressure comes from others. Some of it comes from within, from thinking you must meet expectations no one understands. Everyone's just guessing and following old whispers. And sometimes, the only thing you need to do is stop caring. That night, you lay beside your husband. The bed still creaked, the blanket still stiff, but you felt more at ease than ever. Not because the bed had changed, but because you'd stopped caring about who might be watching. And amid a cat meowing for a midnight snack and wind humming through the wood slats, you felt your heart lighten, like a white cloth, folded quietly away, needing to prove nothing. One of the first things you realize after becoming a wife, after the lumpy bed and the mother-in-law who never knocks, is that personal hygiene isn't what you thought it would be. There's no bathroom, no hot water tap, no lavender-scented soap. Instead, there's an old wooden bucket, cold water, and a single linen cloth for almost everything. You're used to bathing rarely. In the village, they call it seasonal washing, meaning if spring arrives early, you wash. If not, wait for summer. But since getting married, you've started noticing your scent more. Not because it bothers you, but because you're afraid it might bother someone else, especially him. So you think, I should get ready. But how do you get ready when all you have is healthy water, fireplace ash, and a handful of basil? You try every trick you know. Boiling lemongrass to soak your feet, rubbing your hands with rice flour, and brushing your teeth with fine charcoal. None of it is glamorous, but it's better than doing nothing. One day, a neighbor sees you scrubbing clothes with wild beetle leaves. She raises an eyebrow and says, "Getting ready for tonight, are you?" You jump. "No, I'm just doing laundry." She grins, eyes sparkling. "Washing every afternoon?" "Sure, if you say so. Here, let me tell you a trick. Mix mung bean powder with cooled rice water. Apply it to your face. Smooth as a baby's cheek." You try it. It feels like smearing porridge on your face. But the next morning, your skin is noticeably less rough. You make a mental note of it like a treasured family recipe. What about hair? No shampoo, only diluted ash water. It makes your head feel lighter, but itchy. You must untangle knots with a wooden comb and remind yourself that some frizz is not the world's end. And the more sensitive parts? You overhear the old lady at the end of the road whispering, "Mix salt water with a splash of herbal wine. Soak for the length of 2 prayers." You try it. It stings, but it also feels clean. You don't know if it works, but the act of trying makes you feel better somehow. Another time, your mother-in-law hands you a small pouch filled with something that smells nice. "Soak it in hot water. Wipe yourself down before bed," she says. You ask what's in it. She replies, "Beetle leaves, cinnamon bark, a bit of grapefruit peel. Wards off evil spirits." You're unsure what evil spirits means, but you do it anyway. The scent is pleasant. That night, your husband sniffs the air and asks, "What dish did you make today?" You laugh. It's not food, it's a bathing blend. He looks at you and scratches his head. "Oh, it smells nice." And that's when you realize sometimes it's the little things, like the scent of your skin or clean hands brushing against one another, that make all the difference. Medieval hygiene isn't easy. Bathing isn't daily. Clean water has to be drawn, heated, and rationed. But you still do what you can. Not because anyone tells you to, but because you want to keep a small part of yourself feeling presentable. No powder, no perfume. But there are beetle leaves, grapefruit peels, rice flour, and careful hands. There's the quiet attention of a new wife, not trying to impress the world, but to feel comfortable in her own body. One evening, while wiping your feet with a thin cloth, your husband looks over and asks, "What are you doing?" You reply, "Just cleaning up." He sits beside you, watches for a moment, and says, "Do you do this every day?" You nod. He smiles. "Well, then let me fetch the water for you today." You watch him walk to the well, carrying the bucket, his steps a little heavy from fatigue. But something inside you softens. You don't need to smell like flowers. You don't need to be pristine like a palace maid. If someone's willing to draw water for you, that's enough. And when you lie back down on the old straw bed, your hands still smelling faintly of cinnamon bark, you realize you're not so different from modern women after all. Because no matter the century, wanting to prepare yourself carefully for a night of closeness is one of the most deeply human things. While raking husks in the yard one afternoon, you hear giggles behind the fence. Two teenage girls, the blacksmith's daughters, are chatting in whispers, but whatever they're saying sounds delightful. "What do you think love feels like?" one asks. "Maybe like feeling warm just by looking at someone," the other replies, then both burst into laughter. You pause for a moment, then bend down to scoop more husks, your heart feeling a little empty. You've never been in love with your husband. You don't dislike him. He's gentle, quiet, doesn't drink much, works steadily, and washes his bowl after eating. He's a good man. But love? Probably not. Or if it is, it doesn't feel like the love sung about in folk songs. Before the wedding, you only knew him through what the elders said. His family owns a mill. He's strong, can work hard. His mother's kind. And you listened, nodded, listened some more, and nodded again. No one asked what you liked about him. No one ever asked who you liked at all. In those days, marriage was a matter of family, land, and harvest. Love came later, maybe. You remember clearly when your parents said, "Next month you're getting married." You stayed silent. You didn't protest. Because protesting didn't help in this village. But obedience at least kept the house peaceful. And truthfully, you didn't dream big. You weren't waiting for a prince on a white horse. You didn't need handwritten poems. You just hoped for a man who didn't hit his wife, didn't shout every morning, and was kind enough to share the blanket when it got cold. But sometimes, you still wonder, what does love feel like? Will there ever be a day when I look into his eyes and see something more than routine? One day, while tending the fire, you ask your mother-in-law, "How old were you when you married Dad?" She pauses briefly, then replies, 16. "Did you love him back then?" She chuckles. "I loved his axe more, I think. It was sharp, split wood fast." You both laugh. She adds, "Didn't like him much at first, but later realized we could live together. Then I started to care." Started to care. You repeat those words in your mind all afternoon. That night, lying side by side, you turn to look at your husband. He's half asleep, one hand on his forehead like he's pondering something distant. You whisper, "Why did you marry me?" He opens his eyes. "Because my mother said you don't burn rice." You laugh. He adds, "Also, you didn't flinch when you looked at me." You're not sure what he means by that, but it makes you smile. Something inside you softens. The next day, you run into the girl from the day before, the one asking about love. She looks at you, hesitant, then quietly asks, "Do you love your husband?" You smile and reply, "I'm learning how to care." She looks at you, stunned for a moment, then nods. In those days, love wasn't a prerequisite for marriage, but affection, care, could grow afterward. Care was when he fetched water without being asked, when he split the last piece of cake in half and handed you the bigger one, when he didn't say anything. He reached out to help you stand after a tiring day in the fields. You begin to realize that love doesn't arrive like thunder. It seeps in like water through bamboo walls. Slow, gentle, but eventually, it soaks through. One time, he mended the broken handle of your water bucket. No one told him to. You hadn't even asked. But the next morning, the bucket sat neatly outside the door. The new handle woven from rattan, firm and strong. You looked at him without saying a word. Just scooped the water, washed your face, and for some reason, the water felt cooler than usual. You're not sure if that's love, but you know you're no longer afraid of this man. And you no longer feel like a stranger in this house. Maybe in your time, love isn't wild passion. Maybe it's quiet patience. It's kind to live beside each other daily without hurting or walking away. Your first winter at your husband's house arrives faster than you expect. One morning, you see your breath puff like a thin mist. The blanket, thick as it is, can't keep out the cold. Your husband is wrapped tight like a spring roll, and you're curled up at the edge of the bed, hands and feet as cold as river stones. You turn to him and ask seriously, "Is this bed ever going to get warm?" He cracks one eye open and mutters, "Start praying." You exhale a little cloud of fog, pulling the blanket up to your nose. Cold in those days wasn't a joke. There's no fireplace, no oil heater. Just the kitchen fire, warm ashes, and a hope that the wind doesn't blow too hard tonight. The old wooden house creaks with every gust. You can hear the cat curled in the corner, and every living thing in the home is surviving the cold by doing the same thing. Lying still. You begin your bed warming campaign with every trick you know. You heat stones and wrap them in cloth, placing them at the foot of the bed. You leave the blankets in the sun all afternoon. You drink ginger water before sleep. They help a bit, but not enough. One night, you gather your courage and ask your husband, "Can we sleep closer together tonight?" He glances at you, hesitant. "Because it's cold?" You nod. "Yes, because it's cold." He smiles and shifts closer. "If it's because of the cold, that's fine," he says. "And if it's because you care, that's fine too." You smile, a little embarrassed, but you feel warmer than all the blankets combined. From that night on, you slept closer. I'm not always cuddling, but at least I no longer keep a distance like those awkward first weeks. At first it feels strange, but then it becomes normal, easier to fall asleep. The blanket stays in place. Even the cat picks the middle of the bed, brighter than you. You pick up more tips from the women in the village. The old woman down the road says, "Sprinkle pine needles under the bed. They keep your feet warm." The neighbor warns, "Don't overdress at night. Wrap up too tight and you'll catch a reverse chill." Your mother-in-law hands you a small bottle, beeswax and pepper oil. Rub it on your back. It's like roasting on a stove. You try them all. One night, you get so hot you must stick a leg out of the blanket. Other nights, you and your husband lie there listening to the wind, neither of you sleepy. He tells you about the time he nearly froze sleeping outside the mill. You tell him about childhood winters, huddled under straw blankets with your sister, still shivering. "Back then," you say, "my mother always said, sleeping next to someone you love makes winter less scary." He nods and pulls the blanket over your shoulder. "And now?" You answer loud enough. It's not as scary anymore. On cold mornings, you both wake up with messy hair, red noses, and loud sniffles echoing like trumpets. But no one complains, because you both know. This is real life. No soft mattress, no heater. But someone lying beside you already makes you luckier than most. You begin to feel a warmth that doesn't come from objects. It comes from familiarity, from gentle glances while lighting the fire together. From the comfort of knowing that no matter how hard the wind howls, you're not lying there alone. One night, the cold is so sharp that even the lamp oil starts to congeal. The two of you lie still, your cold hands tucked under each other's shirts. You chuckle softly. I think we should rename our bed. To what? To Bear Cave, because I don't want to leave it ever again. He laughs. Then I'll be the Papa Bear. Number, you're the baby bear. I'm Mama Bear. Mama Bear's the one who holds onto the blanket best. You both laugh. The bed is still cold, but your hearts aren't. You can't remember exactly when you started performing. Not the performing you'd see at the village fair, but the quiet, invisible kind. Roles no one handed you, yet everyone expected you to play. Role 1, the dutiful wife. You wake early, stoke the fire, make porridge, grind garlic, clean the house, wash clothes, hang them out to dry, rinse the rice, cook lunch, fan the ashes, all before noon. When someone asks, "How's married life?" you smile. It's normal. But in your head, you think, normal like a runaway ox cart rolling downhill. You don't complain, because a wife who complains makes a noisy home. Or so they say. Role 2, the obedient daughter-in-law. You nod at everything your mother-in-law says. This dish needs more ginger. You nod. Don't hang clothes near the fence. It damages the fabric. You nod. My son gets gassy. Don't give him beans at night. You nod again. Sometimes you feel like your neck might snap from all the nodding. But you try your best. Because everyone says, if your mother-in-law is pleased, your life will be easier. Role 3, the proper village girl. You don't laugh too loudly. You don't eat too fast. You don't go out alone after dusk. You wear your skirts long, your hair neat, and you never let anyone catch you yawning in public. You gently smile even when your husband makes a tasteless joke in front of his cousins, because everyone says a clumsy husband means his wife didn't teach him well. You think, maybe I'll be living in a traditional folk drama, one where the lead role has no lines, just polite nods and carefully managed expressions. One evening, as you quietly mend a shirt by lamplight, you wonder, if no one's watching, would I still be performing? And you answer yourself, probably. I've gotten used to it. Your husband doesn't force you into this, but he also doesn't notice. He doesn't see the breath you hold every time his mother asks, "Have you washed the hand towels yet?" He doesn't realize you wear patches so that he can have a new shirt. He doesn't hear your tired muttering, "Remember the scallions in the porridge?" as you fight off sleep. One night, lying in bed, you whisper, "Do you think I'm doing okay?" He turns to look at you. Why do you ask? "I just don't know if I'm doing any of this right." He's quiet for a moment, then says, "I don't know what right is, but I know you're doing a lot." You smile softly. At least he sees that much. A few days later, your mother visits. She brings a cloth bag, and inside is an old wooden comb. She hands it to you and says, "This belonged to your grandmother. She used it when she was sad, sat by the fire and combed her hair to stop thinking so much." You take it, sit by the stove, and comb your hair while she tells old stories. When she first married, they said her rice was too dry, about how she cried quietly after being told skinny women can't bear strong sons. You listen, and your chest feels lighter. Not because those things were easy, but because you realize you're not the first woman who's ever had to perform. Your mother holds your hand and says gently, "It's okay to act sometimes. Just don't forget who you are under the act." That night, you let go of a few roles. You made plain porridge, no fuss. You left the damp laundry for tomorrow. You rested your head on your husband's arm without asking if he was tired. And when he asked, "Why are you smiling so much tonight?" you replied, "Because I'm not trying to smile. The bed was still hard. The house is still cramped. The chores are still endless. But it felt easier to breathe. Because for the first time in weeks, you fell asleep as yourself. Do you remember the day before your wedding, when your mother taught you how to tie your hair neatly, greet your in-laws, and empty the hearth ashes without scattering them onto someone else's feet? But no one taught you what to do when night falls, and you're lying beside a man, suddenly unsure where to put your hands. No one told you that the thudding in your chest was normal, or what to do when the person beside you sighs, and you don't know whether to turn away or toward him. You learned everything by living it. You learned to listen to your husband's breathing to tell if he's asleep or still awake. You guessed his mood by the way he scratched his head. You figured out that sometimes the best thing to do is not to ask questions. Hand him a warm bowl of tea. The things you thought every woman must know were things no one ever really passed down, because everyone assumed someone else already had. And so, like countless other girls of your time, you entered marriage with a suitcase full of advice about firewood, rice, and pickled vegetables, but empty regarding the emotional parts. You once heard, "Marriage is heaven's will. Live wisely, and things will be fine." But what does wisely mean? Does it mean staying silent when you're angry? Does it mean smiling even when you're exhausted? Does it mean pretending you're not hurt? One day, while sweeping the yard, you overheard two older women chatting nearby. Girls nowadays are so soft, crying at the smallest thing. When I got married, my mom gave me just one piece of advice. Endure it, my dear. Endurance means a long life. Then they both burst into laughter, like it was the most natural truth in the world. You didn't laugh, because deep down, you knew no one should have to live by swallowing everything inside. That afternoon, you sat on the porch, folding old clothes, tangled in a question that refused to untie itself. Am I being a good wife? Your husband came home, saw your quiet face, and sat beside you. Is something wrong? You shook your head, then nodded. It's just, I'm not sure I'm doing this wife thing well. He thought for a moment, then said, I'm not even sure if there's such a thing as being good at being a husband. But if there is, I probably wouldn't pass either. You turned to look at him, and both of you laughed, softly, but honestly. Then he added, maybe we're just learning together. You nodded, and that felt like enough. From that day on, you eased up on yourself. If the soup was bland, you didn't apologize for the entire meal. If a basket handle snapped, you didn't say, sorry, I'm so clumsy. If you happened to sleep facing the wall, you didn't feel like a bad wife, because you were learning how to be a wife in your way, not from some script written by someone else. You remember once your little cousin asked, is being married fun, sis? At the time, you gave the usual answer. It's okay. But now, if someone asked again, you'd be a little more honest. It's not fun right away, but if you stick around long enough, listen to each other, and neither of you gives up, one day you'll feel peace. Peace. Not because the waves disappear, but because you've learned how to swim. That night, you didn't lie awake overthinking. You wished your husband a good night, pulled the blanket up over both your shoulders, and smiled quietly to yourself. Today, I learned a little more about how to live. You and your husband have been married for just over a month, long enough to share a basket of vegetables, close enough to know he snores exactly 3 breaths after lying down, but still far enough that sometimes you don't know what to say after dinner. There are moments when you sit beside the warm ashes of the hearth, listening to the fire crackle, and no one says a word. Not out of anger, not out of sadness, just adjusting and getting used to a silence that's not awkward, but not entirely familiar. You once thought that after marriage, you'd naturally grow close. But living under the same roof doesn't mean you immediately understand each other, especially not in bed. The bed, still that creaky wooden frame, thick blankets and dry straw, had become where you lie side by side every night. One person per side, one shared blanket, one respectful gap. At first you worried, why doesn't he hold me? Then you felt relieved. Good thing he doesn't. That would have been awkward. The truth is, he's just as unsure as you. He shifted and accidentally brushed your shoulder one night, only to pull his hand back like he touched fire. You lay still, heart racing, pretending to be sound asleep. One night, he whispered, "Are you asleep?" You hesitated, then replied, "Not yet." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I don't know if I should hold your hand." You giggled softly. Well, no one's stopping you. So he inched closer, gently touching your fingers like they were made of glass. You thought, this is the man who married me, and he's still learning how to touch softly. And you were learning too. Learning how not to fake sleep. Learning to breathe steadily when the person beside you shifts. Learning how to feel a stranger's warmth slowly becomes less strange each night. One day, you asked your neighbor, "Did you feel awkward sleeping together right after getting married?" She laughed. "Of course. At first, lying close made me think my back had hot flashes. Turned out, it was just my husband's sweat." You burst out laughing. She added, "Just give it time. Couples are like new shoes. Stiff at first, but once broken in, you wouldn't trade them for anything." You came home and told your husband that. He nodded thoughtfully. "Then I must be the left shoe." You teased, "Yeah, because I'm the right foot. Straightforward." Both of you laughed till your bellies hurt. The straw mattress squeaked under you, but no one cared. After a few weeks, you noticed. He started facing you in his sleep. You stopped flinching when your hands brushed. One night, you woke from a dream where you were crying and found his hand gently resting on your back, soft as a breeze. As for intimacy, it was still slow, but no longer tense. No more nights counting gusts of wind. No more silence thick as an unwashed winter blanket. One evening, you were exhausted after a long day in the fields. You flopped onto the bed and groaned. "Today, I dug soil like an ox pulling a plow." He lay down beside you, replying dryly, "And I carried stones like a mill with a broken axle." You chuckled. He did too. Neither of you hesitated to say you were tired. Neither of you kept their distance, as touching was taboo. You realized something simple. Sometimes intimacy doesn't come from grand gestures. It comes from being honest about a sore back. And one night, as drizzle pattered through the leaky roof, you said, "I used to think marriage would be so romantic." He asked, "Like what?" "Like scented candles, fluffy blankets, someone playing love songs on a lute." He grinned. "Should I play the pot for you?" You replied, "Don't. I'm finally falling asleep." Then you turned over and rested your head on his arm. This time he didn't pull away. In that creaky bed, in that little house, under a blanket that smelled of wood smoke and straw, the two of you lay still, no longer strangers. You know you're lucky. Your husband doesn't drink too much, doesn't yell, and doesn't force you to do anything when you're tired. But not everyone is that fortunate. One day, while washing clothes by the stream, you came across a woman from the village. Her sleeves were frayed, and there were dark circles under her eyes. When you greeted her, she slightly nodded without meeting your gaze. You asked, "How have you been lately?" She replied softly, as if afraid someone might overhear, "I'd be fine if I wasn't being nagged from morning till night." Then she bent down and scrubbed her clothes with such force, it looked like she was trying to wring her frustration out into the water. You said nothing. But that night, while peeling potatoes by the fire, her face replayed in your mind, like someone who'd learned to live in the rain, but never had an umbrella. The next day, you told your husband. He sat quietly for a moment. I know her husband, he said. He's hot-tempered. Got punished once for starting a fight at a tavern. You asked, didn't anyone step in? He sighed. In this village, people say, don't meddle in a husband and wife's business. Outsiders won't speak up. You bit your lip. That saying felt both familiar and wrong. You remembered when your mother pinched your ear in the market for speaking too loudly. You remembered how people always said, girls must endure. Being too bold is disrespectful. You remembered a Sunday sermon where the priest declared, a good wife is one who knows when to be silent. But, silent for whose sake? You wondered, what would you do if your husband changed, shouted at you, grabbed your arm not in affection but in anger? You didn't have an answer, because in those days, women didn't have easy choices. Divorce? Number return to your parents? Difficult. Confide in neighbors? You'd be accused of making a fuss. You felt afraid for women like that washerwoman. They were not weak but abandoned in a world where a man's voice weighed more than a church bell. You remembered a story your grandmother once told. Long ago, I talked back to your grandfather and he slapped me. I got up, didn't cry, just said, one slap and you're my husband. Another and you'll be a stranger. He never raised his hand again. You once thought that was a strength. But now, you feel sadness. Why did women have to threaten just to be left in peace? That night, under the blanket, you turned to your husband and asked, what if one day you got so angry? You hit me. He opened his eyes, startled. Why would you ask that? I just want to know what I should do if it ever happened. He sat up, face serious. If I ever did that, then you should leave. Don't stay. You said nothing, not out of sadness, but because something warm settled in your chest differently. Then he added gently, I can't promise I'll always be right, but I promise I'll never use my hands in place of words. You stared at the wooden ceiling and said slowly, then I feel safe. From that day, you began seeing the man beside you differently. Not with infatuation, not with reverence, but with a quiet respect for someone who didn't see you as his possession. One morning you saw the same woman again by the stream. Her eyes looked a bit brighter. You asked how she was. She smiled faintly. He's been tired lately, so he's gone to bed early these past few nights. You didn't ask further. But before leaving, you placed a small pouch beside her. Inside were some mugwort leaves and a piece of paper with handwriting. On it, you had written, if you need someone to listen, I'm at the end of the slope, to the right. You knew you couldn't save the whole world. But you also knew everyone deserves someone who stands on their side. After weeks of wedding rituals, sleepless nights, polite nods, and cooking porridge with your eyes half shut, you realize something more critical than any wife skill or moral sermon. To live, you have to learn how to survive. Not the kind of survival with swords and shields on the battlefield, but the kind where you get through each night, each evening, with your mind steady and your heart intact. You no longer smooth out the blanket corners every night. Not out of laziness, but because you've learned that the wind still gets in no matter how carefully you fold it. You also stop obeying your mother-in-law down to every small detail. She says, only throw out the ashes once they've cooled, or it's a bad omen. You nod. But if it rains and the ashes smoke, you still throw them out. Then you go to sleep. No one punishes you. No omens appear. You've learned to let go of the things that wear you down, but make no one happier. One evening, after the whole village had just returned from the lion dance festival at the church, you and your husband came home late, bodies exhausted. As soon as he lay down, he sighed, "I'm happy today." You were surprised. Why's that? Because you didn't have to pretend to be happy. You looked at him, then laughed. "I thought I hid it well." Turns out, you weren't the only one learning how to endure. He was also learning how to see you. In the following nights, you no longer lay stiff as a plank. You still sometimes pretended to be asleep, but not to avoid him. To give yourself a few minutes of steady breathing and peace before talking or laughing. If used wisely, pretending to sleep can be a gentle survival trick. One night, as you were drifting off, he asked softly, "Do you think marriage is worth it?" You didn't open your eyes, just murmured, "Depends on the day." And today? It's fine. You washed the dishes tonight. You both chuckled, not to wake the cat sleeping between you. You've developed little tactics to get through each night without burning out. When you're sad, you look outside at the moon, no praying, just looking. When you're tired, you claim shoulder pain so he won't start a conversation. When you don't want questions, you hug the biggest pillow in the house and pretend to mend the torn corner. Your husband learns your signals. When he sees you sewing the pillow, he stays quiet. When he sees you out in the yard, he brings warm water. When he sees you massaging your hands and feet, he knows you want silence, and he respects that. And in that silence, you find a kind of companionship that feels easy. Another night, when strong winds creaked the roof like a cricket choking on a leaf, you scooted closer to your husband. Not because it was cold, just because you were worn out. You'd been to the market, cooked 2 full meals, washed 8 shirts, and had to listen to a neighbor go on about how obedient her daughter-in-law was. You had no energy left to be polite. Your husband didn't ask questions. He patted your shoulder as if to say, "Sleep. We'll figure it out tomorrow." And as the rain began to tap gently on the roof, you thought, marriage isn't a test. There are no perfect scores. There are just nights like this, when you've stopped trying so hard and still feel safe. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. Maybe you'll argue about the grain mill being jammed. Maybe your mother-in-law will complain that your pickles are too bland. Maybe your husband will forget to bring the chickens back into the coop. But tonight, you can sleep. And for a woman in those times, sleeping peacefully for one night was already a kind of victory. One morning, just as you slipped on your slippers, your mother-in-law called from the yard, "Dear, today we've invited the blacksmith to come fix the hoe blade." You blinked. Is there anything I need to do?" She replied, fast and firm like a hammer strike. "Peel vegetables, cook rice, wipe the table, fetch water, boil tea, tidy the place, prep the mat, and remember to bring out the wooden clogs to a clean spot. We're hosting a guest." You stayed silent, because you knew. The list could go on. You dove into chores like a bee crashing into its hive. Boiling water while cooking porridge, splitting firewood while sweeping the yard. When the blacksmith arrived, your back was soaked with sweat, your face flushed, and your hair stuck to your forehead. He smiled kindly. "Young wife, but so capable." You smiled back, too breathless to respond, as if you'd run 2 laps around the village. And your husband? He was busy dragging the hoe out to the yard, asking only one thing. "Have you seen the small hammer?" You pointed, said nothing. Your mouth was full, tasting the porridge. You didn't blame him, because you knew. In this time, wife means doing everything. From indoor chores to outdoor tasks, from adult matters to children's needs, from cooking to greeting guests, planting vegetables, and sewing torn underwear. which no one dares to call by name. There was no such thing as a small task, because you had to do it all. You used to think being a wife meant keeping the house. But slowly, you realized the word also includes assistant, secretary, waitstaff, and sometimes emotional gatekeeper. If your husband was tired, you had to sense it. If your mother-in-law was unhappy, you had to guess why. If neighbors said something unkind, you were the first to be mentioned. When you ran into her at the market, you shared this with your cousin. She laughed out loud. When I first got married, I thought being a wife was just one role. Turned out, I was the whole theater troupe. Lead actress, director, costume crew. You laughed too because it felt too true. One evening, after finishing all the day's tasks, you sat sewing your husband's torn shirt. He'd just eaten, now lying with an arm over his forehead. You joked, "Do you think I need extra hands? Because I feel like I'm 3 people in one." He opened his eyes and said, "If you're 3 people in one, then I'm the luckiest man alive." You smiled, but the exhaustion didn't disappear. And you wondered, does being a wife mean doing it all? And if you don't, does that make you a bad one? You didn't have a specific answer, but you did know this. If you don't take a break for yourself, no one else will offer one. So from that day, you quietly started to cut back, not quitting. Instead of rinsing the rice 3 times, you did it twice. Instead of sweeping the yard every day, you did it every other day. Instead of patching the quilt late, you said, "It'll still be here tomorrow." At first, you felt guilty. But then, no one noticed. Your mother-in-law still enjoyed her porridge. Your husband still slept like a curled-up cat. The house still stood. It didn't fall apart. After doing only half the usual list one night, you stretched out on the bed. Your husband looked surprised. "How are you so free today?" You replied calmly, "Because I decided to work less, so I could breathe." He laughed and nodded. "Makes sense." And you realized some pressure doesn't come from others, it comes from yourself. From thinking that if you don't do it all, you'll be judged. From believing a good wife never complains. From forgetting that a wife is also human. She also needs rest. She also deserves to cook a dinner of fried eggs and pickled vegetables, nothing fancy. That night you didn't sew, didn't chop wood, didn't plan tomorrow's chores. You just lay in bed, pulled the blanket over, looked at your husband and asked softly, "If one day I didn't do anything at all, would you leave me?" He chuckled and pulled the blanket up to your shoulders. "If one day you didn't do anything, then I guess I just have to do it. But leave you? Never." You smiled, then slept. Light, like someone who knows she doesn't have to be a wife all the time. Live alongside someone fully and simply. You used to think that intimacy would happen often after the wedding. Not because you were particularly eager, but because that's what everyone said. Get ready, girl. After marriage, every night's a battlefield, your cousin once whispered with a wink. Even the neighbor chimed in. Those boys are full of energy. In the first weeks, you won't even have time to cook rice. And yet, months passed, and you were still cooking rice regularly. That thing, the one everyone talked about but no one explained clearly, turned out not to be as constant as the rumors claimed. Some nights, you were both too tired. Dinner, then sleep. Some nights you had cramps, or he had back pain. Some nights were too cold, and you only wanted to curl under the blanket like a roasted sweet potato. And sometimes, you looked at each other, smiled, and fell asleep, doing nothing more. At first, you worried. Was it you? Were you not attractive enough? Or was your husband not as excited as people said men would be? You shared this with a close friend, and she burst out laughing. Oh, don't listen to those gossiping aunties. They exaggerate for drama. If any couple's that fired up every night, they'd need vitamin supplements by next week. You breathed easier, so it wasn't just you. Then you realized intimacy is like a meal. Some days you crave it. Some days you don't. Some days, all you want is soup. And what matters most is that both of you feel comfortable. Your husband never pressured you. There was never a, "you owe me tonight," or "it's been too long since we did something." If you turned over and faced the wall, he pulled the blanket up and slept. He understood if you reached out to hold his hand and inched closer. No words, no fuss, but enough to make you feel safe. One evening, while the two of you were shelling peanuts after dinner, you asked quietly, "Do you think we're different?" He raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "I mean, we're not like those stories people tell. Not loud, not intense." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't know how others live, but living like this feels peaceful." You smiled, and it did feel peaceful. Peace was not having to fake being tired to avoid something. Peace was that he was not sulking when you said, "I'm not feeling up for it tonight." Peace was being able to lie next to each other, backs turned, and still feel close. You'd heard so many sayings. A wife must satisfy her husband. She must keep the flame alive. She has to keep her man at home. But you thought, if someone can only be kept through sex, maybe that person never intended to stay in the first place. Once, you visited your cousin. She was cooking, looking grumpy. "What's wrong?" you asked. She sighed. "He got mad because I said I didn't feel like it tonight. Now he's sleeping in the chicken coop." You didn't know how to comfort her. That night, you told your husband. He said, "Poor her. And poor him too. When people can't listen to each other, everyone feels alone." You nodded. That one simple line. It stayed with you. After that, you paid closer attention whenever he touched your hand. Not to guess what he wanted, but to check in with yourself. Am I open to this right now? And every time you made the first move, even if it was just resting your hand on his shoulder while he washed his face, he'd smile like you'd given him a gift. No schedules, no pressure, no duties, just two people, slowly learning how to be close without wearing each other out. And eventually, you understood. Sex is not an obligation. It's something that happens naturally, when both hearts feel light, when there's trust, and when there's genuine desire to be near. No red flags, no drums or fanfare, no need for anyone's permission, just a warm look, a gentle squeeze of the hand, a quiet night when no one says what must happen, and something real unfolds anyway. You were slowly getting used to married life, sharing meals, sharing a bed, and keeping things private. But then you realized, in a small village, there's no such thing as private. One sunny morning, you were airing out the blankets when the nosy aunt from next door burst in, clutching a basket of vegetables, barely catching her breath. "Sweetie, they're saying at the market that you've gotten skinnier since the wedding." You blinked, confused. "Really? I've been eating just fine." She shook her head, voice suddenly serious. "Losing weight like that is a sign, you know. You'd better be careful. Don't let your husband wear you out too much." You blushed, wishing the ground would swallow you whole. She, however, calmly dropped her vegetables into a bowl and muttered while sorting, "A new bride is supposed to look plump. Being this thin, not good. Probably 'cause every night is, well, you get what I mean." And you did. But part of you wanted to pretend you didn't, to escape. Later that day, the neighbor from behind the fence came over with some rice cakes, speaking in a whisper like she was planning a secret mission. I brought you some scented herbs. Soak in them before bed. It helps you. Relax. But don't do it too close to bedtime, or it might make you too cold, and ruin the mood. You thanked her profusely, even though you weren't sure whether to toss the herbs into a bath or a soup pot. Another time, while discreetly hanging your undergarments behind the house, your cousin's young daughter ran over and pointed at the laundry line. "Auntie, are these so Uncle can kiss you?" You nearly choked on your spit. "No, sweetie, they're just drying. That's it." "Oh. My mom said when you get married, you have to wear pretty clothes to make your husband happy." You weren't sure whether to laugh or stay silent. Ultimately, you just nodded. I guess that's true. The entire village had decided your marital life was community property. Everyone had advice. Everyone had tips. Everyone had once been young, and none of them could let it go. At the market, the fabric seller leaned in and whispered, "Does your husband like linen? It's soft on the skin. Put it on and he'll love it." You hesitated. I don't think he knows the difference between fabrics." She laughed loudly. "Just wear it and then ask him." That night, you told your husband. He chuckled and said, "I feel like I'm the last one to know about my own life." You nodded, because everyone else wants to give advice first. You both laughed. But something inside you felt a bit unsettled. You understood that in a village people care, but sometimes their care pokes into places you'd rather keep sacred. You didn't hate them. You wish the world allowed you to say, "I'd rather not talk about that." One midday, as you were hanging up freshly washed linens, your mother-in-law walked over quietly and said, "Our house doesn't need to be noisy, but don't let it get too quiet either. People notice. People start to talk." You looked at her and saw no judgment, just the cautious worry of an older generation. You replied, "I think as long as the two of us feel at peace, that's enough." She nodded gently and walked away. She didn't say more, but she didn't bring it up again either. And that felt like a slight relief, because even though the whispers lingered, you knew you didn't owe anyone an explanation. That night, you and your husband lay side by side, listening to the frogs croaking in the yard. You asked, "Do you think we're doing enough?" He replied, "You mean that?" You nodded. He sighed, "I don't keep count. As long as you're not tired and I don't feel forced. I think it's enough." You rested your head on his arm and smiled softly. Out there, people would continue to gossip, speculate, and embellish. But here, in this small bed under a well-worn blanket, two people were quietly choosing what felt right for each other. One morning, you woke up and knew you didn't want to do anything that day. Not out of laziness, but because your body felt like it had just been trampled by a battalion of firewood, straw, well water, and stale bread. Your arms ached, your legs were heavy, and your head buzzed lightly. You tiptoed out of bed, stepped into the yard, and let out a long breath, as if trying to send all the kitchen smoke, vegetables, and wet blankets floating off into the sky. You thought, "Today, I'll rest." A simple thought, and yet it felt like a sin. You said to your mother-in-law, "I'm feeling a bit tired today. May I take the morning off?" She looked you over from head to toe and replied, not harshly, but not kindly either, "All right. Just remind your husband to do the dishes. The water might freeze soon." You gave a crooked smile, and while you lay down, trying to rest, you heard her scrubbing pots, the rooster banging against the coop, and your husband coughing as he lit the fire outside. And your heart wouldn't stay still. You got up, threw on a coat, grabbed the broom, and told yourself, "All right, I'll just do a little, to ease the guilt." And so, once again, you returned to your role in the play, I'm Fine, when all you wanted was to curl up and fast from the world. That night, lying flat on the bed and breathing like a cart that just climbed a hill, your husband turned and asked, "Why didn't you nap this afternoon?" You said, "Because I couldn't." "What do you mean?" "I mean, if I lie still, things will still move without me, but I'll feel wrong." He sighed, then said, "Then tomorrow, just lie down. I'll take care of it." You chuckled. "How much can you actually take care of?" "Not much. But if you rest, I can. If you keep pushing, we'll both be down tomorrow." You didn't reply, but that sentence echoed in your mind all night. You realized you were living in a time when women didn't have the luxury of weakness. People praised you for being tough when you swept the yard with a fever. They patted your back, saying, "You're amazing," when you harvested rice and cooked dinner. But no one asked, "Are you okay?" You didn't blame them. That's just how they lived. Your mother gave birth to you while still boiling rice cakes. Your grandmother once told you she split firewood with her 6th child after washing her hair postpartum. Women were not allowed to be tired. If you were, you still worked, until you passed out. And even though you knew it was absurd, you carried that belief daily. The next morning, you made a decision. You were going to rest. Rest. No cooking porridge. No washing clothes. No gathering firewood. Just lying there, listening to the world outside. Your husband fumbled a bit. The soup was undercooked. The rice is a bit scorched. But the house didn't burn down. You felt guilty and proud. When he walked in with a bowl of porridge, you laughed. "You look like my mom when she first married my dad." "Because of the porridge?" You nodded. "She added twice as much water, too." He smiled. "But you still ate it." "I was hungry, and because I know I don't need to do everything to be worthy of being a wife." It was the first time you said it out loud, and you weren't scared. That afternoon, you walked into the yard slowly. No rush, no pressure. To hang the blankets. Your husband was sawing wood and looked up. "Feeling better?" "Not yet," you replied. "But I'm going to be tired properly. Then I'll feel better." You no longer needed to prove anything. You didn't need to smile all the time. You didn't need to be good at everything. You didn't always need to be fine. Your husband knew you had limits, and you knew being tired was a right too. That night you slept deeper than usual, not because the bed was softer, but because you finally stopped pretending to be strong. You'd heard plenty of stories about the first time. Stories of girls shy like pink lotus buds, or trembling under a dim moonlit sky. Old folk songs hummed by aunties while milling rice had painted the whole thing like some sacred performance, with flickering oil lamps and hearts pounding like festival drums. Then your first time arrived, and it was nothing like any of those songs. No flowers, no moonlight, no whispered sweet nothings, just a creaky bed, a blanket that faintly smelled of smoke, and a mood that was half confused, half amused. You remember clearly, your husband was just as awkward as you. His hands trembled, his face red like someone who'd accidentally sipped ginger wine. And you just lay there, eyes wide open, unsure where to look. The ceiling, the oil lamp, that weird crack in the wall. "Are you sure we're doing this right?" you whispered. He stammered. It's my first time too." You burst out laughing, relieved and oddly touched. Turns out neither of you had a clue. No guidebooks, no diagrams, no one to ask. Everything was blurry and improvised. You both fumbled through it, constantly pausing to ask, "Is this okay? Does it hurt?" Are you all right? If someone had been eavesdropping outside, they might have thought you two were patching up a blanket. And when it was all over, both of you lay there breathing like you'd chopped wood all morning. You stared at the ceiling and thought, so that's it. No lightning bolts, no shining glory. But then you turned to look at him, hair messy, eyes sleepy, smiling shyly, and your heart warmed. Not because it was terrific, but because it was real, awkward, gentle, and without pressure. The next morning, you sat by the fire, still feeling sore. But it wasn't the bad kind of sore. It was like the ache after a clumsy dance. Legs tired, but spirit light. You told your cousin about it. She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her rice. What? Did you think the first time would be heaven? You said, I thought at least it wouldn't feel like pushing a cart over potholes. She grinned. That's exactly it. The first time's not supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to be the start of learning each other. And you started to understand. You understood that no one is born knowing everything. Those bodies aren't machines you can switch on. That feeling of safety matters more than any technique. There were nights later on, still awkward, still brief, but gentle, where afterward you'd ask, so, how do you think we did? He'd hug a pillow and smile. Maybe a 6. But you smiled, so I'll bump it up to 9. You'd rest your head on his arm and whisper, we'll save the last point for next time. Slowly, intimacy became something lighter. No more breath holding, no more keeping score. Just the two of you, learning to smile and let it happen naturally. You still blushed sometimes, but you weren't scared anymore. One night you even took the lead. Your husband looked at you like you'd just proposed all over again. He whispered, Are you sure? You nodded. If I wasn't sure, how else would I find out? And you realized that in a life often filled with chores and silence, these fumbling moments brought you closer than anything else. No fireworks, no compliments, no comparisons. Just two people, learning, laughing, and listening to each other. You used to think that love had to be spoken out loud. There should be I love you, I care about you, or at the very least, a wildflower awkwardly tucked into your sleeve. But after a few months of being a wife, you realized your husband doesn't say those things. No sweet talk, no poetry, no promises of the moon and stars. Instead, he shows love in quiet ways. So quiet that you might miss it if you weren't paying attention. Like how, early in the morning, when you're still drowsy, he finishes cutting grass and quietly leaves your shoes out in the sun to warm by the porch. Or on days when your head aches, he doesn't ask many questions. He boils a pot of herbal steam and leaves it beside the bed, then vanishes like a courteous ghost. One day you asked, Do you love me? He was tying bamboo strips for the vegetable basket, paused for a moment, then replied, Would I have fixed your shoes last week if I didn't? You laughed, shaking your head. But inside, it felt like someone had drizzled honey into your tea. You shared this with the neighbor lady. She chuckled. My husband's the same. Never says I love you. But when I had a cold, he chopped a whole firewood so I wouldn't have to go outside in the evening. Love's not in the mouth, dear. It's in the aching back after worrying for a wife. After that, you started noticing more. You noticed he always walked ahead in new places, testing if the ground was slippery. You noticed his eyes dart when he came home late, checking whether you'd eaten. You noticed he never criticized your half-finished dresses, just asked, Need help snipping the threads? No one would label these gestures love, but you knew. This was his way of speaking without words. You used to worry. If no one says it, how do you know it's there? But then you understood. Not everyone loves in the same way. Some love with glances. Some love with hugs. Some love to warm their shoes in the sun. You also found your way of loving him. Not through grand gestures, but through little ones. Adding just a pinch more salt to his favorite soup. He placed his handkerchief exactly where he always forgets it. Not asking, "What's wrong?" when he sighs, just resting your hand gently on his back. One rainy afternoon, the two of you ducked into the kitchen for shelter. The thatched roof dripped water in slow, rhythmic drops. You pulled your sleeve up and dried his hair silently. He said nothing, just looked at you and gave a quiet nod. Just one nod. But you knew. It meant thank you, I get it. And you being here is enough. And you realized, love doesn't have to sound like a poem. It doesn't need sparkle. It doesn't need drums and fireworks. It doesn't need to be said out loud to be real. Love can be as quiet as a shirt drying in the right breeze. It's as simple as saving half a piece of bread, even when you're both hungry. As still as a quiet evening where nothing is said. Peace hangs in the air. You once thought you'd be sad if your husband didn't say, "I love you." But now you know. It's sadder when someone says, "I love you," beautifully, but doesn't know how to care for you when you're sick. You look at him, now snoring with his arm flopped over his face, mouth slightly open, hair sticking up like a bird's nest, and think, he's not romantic, but he's here. And sometimes, being here, steadily, silently, without asking anything in return, is the warmest kind of love you've ever known. One morning, just like any other, you were tending the fire when your mother-in-law walked in and said, as casually as announcing the weather, "Today we're having gourd soup and braised fish, your husband's favorite." You paused, looked up, and gently asked, "Mom, I'm feeling a little tired today. Could we just have boiled vegetables?" She hesitated for a second. Just 1 second. But to you, it felt like a slight tremor. Because before this, you would never ask back. She didn't get angry, didn't scold. She just nodded. "Then boil the veggies. Just remember to salt them well." You smiled. "Yes, Mom." And just like that, you realized you had spoken up. Quietly, but clearly. You had never thought you had any rights in this house. When you first married, you felt like a lodger, staying over, eating off others' plates, trying your best not to disturb anyone. You didn't choose the meals. You didn't decide when to sleep. You didn't dare say, "Today I'd like to sit alone for a while." But now you've started to speak, in a small voice, in short phrases, but always sincerely. You tell your husband, "Please stop hanging your coat on the door hook. I keep bumping my head on it." You tell your sister-in-law, "Wash your hands when you're done before helping in the kitchen." You tell your mother-in-law, "The firewood's damp. Let me chop a few dry ones." No one reacts harshly. No one praises you either. But they start listening. At first, you were testing the waters. But when the sky didn't fall, you began feeling more confident. One day, your husband struggled to fix the lid on the water jar. You saw he was using too much force and said, "Let me do it. This needs patience, not muscle." He looked surprised, then handed you the lid. No grumbling, no hurt pride. You fixed it. The lid sealed perfectly. No more leaking. You both smiled. For the first time, you didn't feel like just the wife. You felt like part of the household. Someone with a voice, not just hands to follow orders. You shared this with your cousin at the village well. She nodded knowingly. Yeah. Being a wife doesn't mean being mute. A wife keeps the home steady. And to do that, you need to know when to speak. You asked, "But how do you talk without sounding like you're arguing?" She winked. "Don't argue. Just say it at the right time. Say it short. Then hush." You started practicing that, and surprisingly, it worked. You never raise your voice. You don't nag. You don't complain. You speak when it matters. One sentence, clear, honest. One day, your mother-in-law was yelling because a chicken had hidden in the haystack. You said nothing, waited until she calmed down, then approached and offered her a cup of water. Mom, maybe you're tired. Let me go catch it. She drank it, sighed, and muttered, "That chicken's as stubborn as her great-grandmother." You both burst out laughing. That night, your husband whispered, "You really said the right thing today." You smiled. "I'm practicing how to have just the right volume." Since then, you've stopped being the silent presence in the house. Your voice may be soft, but it carries weight. People begin to ask you, "What seasoning do you think this soup needs? Which field should we harvest first?" You pick that fabric? It looks lovely. You haven't changed anything significant. You didn't lead a revolution. But you've shown up, clearly, with opinions, and people now listen. And you realize that being a woman and wife doesn't mean disappearing. You still cook, still tend the fire, still wash the dishes. But now, you also have a voice. And in a world where women are often treated as an afterthought, being heard, even just for a few words, is enough to make you feel truly alive. One morning, while you were rinsing bowls in the yard, hands still dripping wet, your husband's aunt popped by. She didn't ask how you were, didn't ask what you were having for lunch. Instead, she tilted her head, squinted, and asked bluntly, "So, when are you giving the family a grandchild?" You looked up, gave a crooked smile, still holding the soup ladle, unsure whether to answer honestly, dodge the question, or pretend you hadn't heard. But she didn't let it go. When your mother-in-law was your age, she already had your husband, and now, all I see is you two smiling all the time. But no results. You chuckled awkwardly. "We haven't planned for it yet. We're taking our time." From that moment on, the question became your unwanted companion. At the market, have you had morning sickness yet? While picking vegetables, "You look a bit fairer this month, don't you?" You started avoiding market chatter, crowded meals, even sitting too still, afraid someone might sneak over to whisper something about eggs or your belly. You didn't blame them. In the village, having children was almost a title. Without them, no one was certain if you were truly a proper wife. You'd heard stories. A woman who, after 2 years of marriage without a child, was called a walking rice jar. Another who was gossiped about as can't keep her husband after he moved to the next village to marry again when no baby arrived. You began to worry. If I take too long, will they think I'm useless? You told your husband. He looked at you, then said plainly, "No one has the right to ask about that, except us." You exhaled. "But they ask all the time. Then we don't answer." His words were light, almost casual. But slowly you understood. He wasn't ignoring the issue. He just refused to be caught in a cycle someone else built. One night, lying side by side in familiar silence, you asked softly, "Do you want a baby soon?" He replied, "I do. But I want it when you're well, when you feel ready, not because people are asking." You smiled, your hand slipping into his, as if a heavy stone had just rolled off your back. After that, whenever someone asked, "So, when's the baby coming?" you'd smile and say, "The baby will come when it's meant to. We're not rushing." People would chuckle awkwardly and quickly change the subject to whether lettuce or mustard greens should be planted this season. You realized that women are often defined by their ability to have children, but you wanted to be known for more: your kindness, quiet strength, and laugh when your laundry slapped you in the face on a windy day. You began spending more time on yourself, drinking Voi leaf tea. Sleep earlier and no longer force yourself to do what your body isn't ready for. At first, your mother-in-law was puzzled, but you told her, "I do want a child, but I want to welcome one when I feel peaceful. Not because someone asked, but because we're truly ready." She nodded, didn't say more. But the next day, she made you a pot of fish and starfruit soup. Not your favorite, but a healing dish. You understood the gesture, and it made you feel lighter. And from then on, the pressure began to fade. You no longer needed to rush into becoming a mother, because you know that no one will need to push you when the time is right. That night, as you both turned off the lights, you whispered, "If someone asks again tomorrow, can you answer for me?" Your husband chuckled. "I'll tell them. Your meal portions aren't big enough to feed 2 people just yet." You giggled and pulled the blanket up to your shoulder. "Then make sure to give me an extra piece of fish tomorrow, okay?" One afternoon, while rinsing your hands after planting rice seedlings, you looked down at the water and suddenly saw something unfamiliar. That face, hair neatly tied, sun-darkened cheeks, hands rough from healthy water, was yours. But you wondered, beyond being a wife, a daughter-in-law, who am I now? You used to embroider, hum tunes while cooking, sharpen knives while imagining upside-down fairy tales, where the princess wore a conical hat to the fields and the prince scrubbed dishes. But since you got married, everything you used to love slowly faded into the background. You stopped singing, afraid your mother-in-law might think you were too idle. You stopped embroidering, because store-bought things are cheaper than thread now. You stopped telling your quirky stories because every night you passed out before finishing a single thought. One day, while organizing your chest of clothes, you stumbled on a half-finished piece of embroidery, an unopened flower, a few threads still tangled in the needle. You picked it up, your hands trembling slightly, then gently set it back down. Not out of regret, but because you weren't sure if you were still the person who once held that needle. That night, as you and your husband ate dinner, you asked casually, "What kind of person do you think I am?" He paused, sunflower seed halfway to his mouth. "You're my wife." "Yeah, but besides that," he thought. "You're good at lots of things. You cook well. You remember the chickens by name. You wash dishes fast. You smiled. But still, something felt missing. After that, you started paying more attention. You noticed that you always stood behind the meal, behind greetings, behind closed doors. No one made you do that, but somehow you had gotten used to it. One day, your sister-in-law asked offhandedly, "What did you like most before you got married?" You almost answered gack sticky rice, then stopped. Because honestly, you couldn't remember. Couldn't recall who you were before you spent each day tending fires, sweeping yards, and shampooing others' hair before you even had time to wash your own. You told your neighbor about this. She sighed. "When I had my first child, I thought I'd vanished. Everyone just called me T's mom. No one said my name anymore." You asked, "So what did you do?" "I started saying my own name out loud every morning. Sounds silly, but it reminded me I still exist." You went home and tried it. Whispered your name softly in front of the foggy mirror. "Hello? Me." It felt strange, but after a few times, a quiet warmth settled in your chest. You began carving out 15 minutes each evening just for you. Some days you stitched again on that old fabric. Some days you shaped dough into little fish. Some days you sat behind the kitchen, watching the sun dip across the thatched roof, doing absolutely nothing. Your mother-in-law noticed, but said nothing. One midday, She quietly left the rice pot for you to tend and lit the fire herself. A tiny swap in roles, but it gave you space to breathe. You told your husband, I don't want to be just someone's wife. I want to still be me. He smiled. I married you because you're you. If you disappear, then who'll sleep next to me? You laughed. Sleeping with me without knowing what I love is like sleeping with a pillow. Our pillow at least smells like rice husk. And I smell like sweat. Both of you burst out laughing. And you realized holding on to yourself in marriage isn't selfish. It's how you stay whole amidst all the roles others expect of you. You still cook, still wash, still take care of your husband, and maybe kids someday. But you also scribble nonsense on the floor with charcoal. Sing when you know no one's around. Write little jokes on banana leaves just to read them back to yourself. And you know, you're still you. Even as a wife, a daughter-in-law, a woman of the 13th century. One afternoon you were sweeping the yard when it began to rain. Not a downpour, just a sudden steady drizzle, enough to dampen the ashes, moisten the laundry, and make your heart soften a little. You gathered things and ran under the eaves, watching the rain fall like tangled threads from the sky. From afar, your husband came running home, shielding a bag of brown tubers, his shirt muddy, his face glowing like he'd just won a prize. And the prize was water chestnuts. He dropped the bag down, grinning. Got them. Your favorite. You laughed, reaching out to take them, not even asking. How did he remember? In the kitchen, you cooked slowly. Not because the dish was difficult, but because you felt at peace. The kitchen was no longer a place you had to stand. It was a place you wanted to. This house, this little yard, the quiet footsteps of your sister-in-law every morning, the faint cough of your mother-in-law when the wind turned cold. They no longer felt like sounds you had to grow used to. They had become part of you. That night, after dinner, the whole family sat under the glow of the oil lamp. No one spoke loudly, only the clink of dishes, the cat stretching, and the hand fan being folded back into a corner. You mended clothes, hands moving in rhythm. Your mother-in-law handed you a cup of ginger tea, saying, "The wind's cold tonight. Drink a bit to warm your stomach." You thanked her, not overly formal, not awkward. Your husband poured you another cup and placed it gently on the table without a word. But his gaze lingered on you longer than usual. And in that quiet, you thought, I'm home. Not your parents' house, not your husband's house. Home. Where you don't have to perform. Where you don't have to smile all the time to be accepted. You can breathe gently, place your hand on the table, and not fear being judged. You once feared you'd never fit in and be compared to some better wife. If you were just a bit different, they'd say, she's not right for this family. But now you understand. You don't have to fit. You have to be real. And slowly, people open their hearts. One morning, your mother-in-law handed you a piece of fabric and said, "When I first got married, your great-grandmother gave this to me. Keep it. Make whatever you like with it, as long as it's something you like." You took it, eyes stinging, nodding instead of saying the 100 thank yous you felt. The next day, you turned that fabric into a small scarf. It wasn't perfect, but it was the first thing you'd sewn since your wedding that wasn't meant to be used. Just kept because it was yours. That night, as your husband lay beside you, you turned to ask, "Do you think I've changed since we got married?" He replied lazily, "A lot." "How so?" "You talk less, but when you do, it sounds like you now." You smiled and rested your head on his shoulder. "Because I feel like I'm here now. I don't need to go anywhere else." And that was true. You no longer dream of a different bed, blanket, or house. You no longer wish for someone to understand you immediately. You've learned to welcome things that arrive slowly, like dry wood catching flame after rain. You've learned to stay, not just in body, but in heart. One sunny day, you were invited to a memorial lunch at your aunt's house on the other side of the village. After all the eating and cleaning up, the women gathered to do what they do best: talk about husbands. My husband? As soon as he gets home, he massages my back right away. Whenever I'm sick, he boils herbs, makes porridge, wipes my forehead. As for mine, the moment I frown, he's already asking, "What's wrong, babe?" You sat there, nodding politely and smiling, but inside, you feel a little quiet. Because your husband wasn't quite like that. He doesn't say sweet things. He's not naturally nurturing. He can't remember what flowers you like. When you have a fever, he panics and spills water everywhere. When you're tired, he makes rice, overly soft rice. You came home, lay in bed, and sighed. Not because you felt sorry for yourself, but because you started to wonder, is he not good enough? Or, am I expecting the wrong things? That night you said, "Today I heard women talking about how romantic their husbands are." He scratched his head. "Do I do stuff like that?" You hesitated. "Not really." He fell silent for a moment, then said honestly, "I don't really know how to do those things. But, if you need me to, I can learn." You turned to look at him. Those eyes that aren't good with flowery words, but never once looked away when you needed help. And suddenly, you realized, you don't need him to be like anyone else. You don't need him to read your mind. You don't need him to put your shoes on for you or towel dry your hair like in those romantic stories. You need him to be himself and to mean it. The next morning, while you were sorting vegetables outside, your neighbor, still chewing betel leaf, dropped by and said, "Your husband's so quiet, but he clearly cares. The other day you were coughing, and he came to the market asking what kind of leaves to buy. Sweet guy." You were surprised. Turns out there were things he did that you never noticed, because he didn't talk about them, didn't show them off, didn't wait for praise. And you began to remember. That time you had a nightmare, he didn't wake you up, just pulled the blanket over your shoulder and waited till you calmed. That time you slipped, he didn't laugh, just quietly wiped the dirt from the hem of your skirt. That time you sat silently all afternoon, sad about something he never asked about. But that night, there was less chili in the porridge than usual. You realized he loves in his way. Quiet, but steady. Not flashy, but never absent. One day you said, "You don't have to be romantic. Just don't leave." He nodded, not even asking why. Because maybe he was thinking the same thing. From then on, you stopped comparing. Stopped worrying that your husband wasn't like the others. Stopped wishing you were the kind of perfect wife you'd read about. You were just you. He was just him. And the two of you. Just trying hard enough not to give up halfway. The next time you see those same women from the memorial, they are still telling stories about how great their husbands are. You just smiled, didn't interrupt. Then the oldest lady among them suddenly said, "But you know, all your husbands are quick to argue. That one's husband." She pointed to you. "I've never once heard him raise his voice." Everyone laughed. You laughed too. But this time, there was no sense of lack. Just a tiny moment of recognition, and it felt warm. That night, you wrapped your arms around your husband and whispered gently, "I don't need you to be like anyone else. I just need you to be mine." One overcast morning, you woke up feeling off. Not because of anything specific, just a heaviness in your chest. like someone had placed a small sack of sand there. Not enough to suffocate you, but not light enough to ignore. You cooked as usual, tended the fire like normal, but the joy was missing. You didn't laugh at your sister-in-law's silly comment, didn't feel proud even when the soup turned out just right. You tried to smile, tried to be polite, but when your husband asked, "Are you okay today?" you didn't answer. You just quietly turned away. That night, lying down, you didn't cuddle him like usual. You turned your face to the wall, not out of anger, just tired, and not even sure why. He didn't press, didn't coax. He pulled the blanket over you and breathed gently beside you. You felt both grateful and sad, because some days are like that. You don't want to perform. You don't want to be the wife who's always cheerful, always understanding, always well-behaved. You want to be still. The next morning, he handed you a cup of warm water. No words. You took it, also without a word. But in his eyes, you saw that he understood. He understood that you're allowed to be tired, allowed to be silent, allowed not to be the perfect wife 7 days a week. You used to think marriage was like a grand performance, a stage where you always had to look polished, speak properly, and act gently. But then you realized no one can perform forever. You told this to your neighbor. She laughed. Sometimes I don't say a single word to my husband. He doesn't ask, but we still share the blanket that night. Still fine. You asked, "Shouldn't we talk about it?" She replied, "When you need to talk, then talk. But when you don't. Don't be afraid of the silence." You thought, she's right. Silence in a marriage isn't always a crack. Sometimes it's a pause, a breath, a necessary quiet before moving forward again. And slowly, you felt lighter. You stopped forcing yourself to be cheerful when you weren't. Stopped pretending to be okay when you weren't. Stopped pressuring yourself to be capable at all times. Because you realized you don't have to be a flawless version of yourself to be loved. You have to be you. Tired. Lie down. Weary. Rest. Silent. Then be silent. And when your spirit returns, you'll continue. One night, while your husband was massaging your legs, clumsy, a bit rough but earnest, you asked, "Do I ever bother you?" He looked up, confused. "Why do you ask that?" "Because sometimes I don't talk. I don't cuddle. I don't cook well." He laughed. "You're my wife, not a clay jar. You don't have to be perfectly round all the time." You giggled. "But a jar with dents is cracked." "Yeah, but people can have dents. Because people can heal." That simple sentence stuck with you. Because in marriage, no one stays whole forever. Everyone has days they bend, stumble, or fall. What matters is whether someone is there, waiting for you to stand back up. From then on, you stopped trying so hard. If the rice came out mushy, you'd eat it with fish sauce. If you snapped at him, you'd apologize later. If you needed silence, you embraced it. And your husband stayed. Never demanded. Never measured. He had his off days, too. Days of grumpiness, fatigue, and laziness. But still, both of you kept choosing to stay. And you finally understood. Marriage isn't a performance. It's a shared life. A place where you can take off the mask, toss the script, and breathe as your true self. One Sunday morning, you decided to try making some cakes. Nothing fancy. Just mung bean-filled bon bot lock, the kind you used to eat as a child back at your mother's house. You mixed the flour, shaped the dough, and ended up with something as lopsided as a baby sweet potato. You tried again. The second one looked even worse. When you fried them, the oil exploded everywhere. Smoke filled the kitchen, and even the cat outside ran for its life. Your husband rushed in, panicked. "Is something on fire?" You stood there, hands on hips, face red with shame and laughter. Not fire, no. but I think these cakes could double as paving bricks." He looked at the misshapen pile, sat down, and tried one. He winced. Chewy like a raincoat left out to dry for 3 days. You pouted, and yet you're still eating it? He grinned. So you won't feel bad. You burst out laughing, tears from both the smoke and the joy. And you realized you don't have to be good at everything. You don't have to nail every recipe. Don't have to sew perfectly like a master tailor. Don't have to memorize every trick for keeping your home, your marriage, or your reputation spotless, like the older women in town whisper to each other. You have to try, and if you fail, laugh. That's enough. Later that afternoon, your mother-in-law came into the kitchen, saw the pitiful-looking cake still sitting in the tray, and asked gently, "You made these?" You nodded, bracing for critique. But she just said, "When I first got married, I made cakes exactly like that." Your father-in-law coughed for an hour after eating one. You laughed. Turns out, everyone has a clumsy beginning. Your neighbor once told you, "One time I tried to make candied ginger and burned the sugar until it looked like squid ink. My husband didn't eat it, but he smiled, because he knew I was learning." You asked, "Did you eventually get it right?" She shrugged. "No. I gave up. But at least I learned ginger candy isn't my thing. And that's okay. Not everyone has to be good at everything. Some people cook well. Some fold laundry fast. Some aren't good at any of it. But they know how to listen, hold a hand at the right moment, and sit beside you when you need silence." You looked at yourself again. You can't bake. You don't sew in straight lines. You don't talk as sweetly as your cousin. But you know when to stay quiet, when to hug, and when to act silly just so your husband laughs after a long day. That night, your husband finished washing the dishes, sat down beside you while you were sewing, and asked, "Do you think you're doing okay?" You looked at your crooked needlework and smiled. "Not great. But maybe good enough." He nodded and pulled the shirt closer. "Then let me try stitching something on it." You blinked. "You know how to embroider?" "Nope. But if I mess it up, at least you'll laugh." And together, you stitched something unclear. Maybe a flower or tiny snake. But you kept that shirt forever as a reminder. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. Just honest enough. Joyful enough. And together enough. You were scrubbing a pot when your husband called from the yard. "Babe, the hen laid eggs in the wrong nest again." You wiped your hands, walked out, crouched down to pick up each egg, and murmured, "If a hen can lay wrong, it can lay right again. People mess up too." Right after you said that, you paused. Wait. When did I start saying things that sound like my mother-in-law? You stepped back into the kitchen and glanced in the mirror. Nothing drastic had changed. But somehow, you were different. Your hair had grown longer, tied up more neatly. Your voice was softer, but steadier. Your eyes no longer looked lost, like when you first moved in. And your hands, though still clumsy with rope knots, now knew when to hold tight and let go. You were no longer the nervous bride on the wedding night. No longer curled up in fear over what your husband might be thinking. No longer flinching when someone mentioned how a wife should behave. You didn't even know when the shift happened. Maybe it was the day you bandaged your cut without crying. Maybe it was the moment you finally said, "I'm not feeling well today," without guilt. Or maybe when you stitched your husband's shirt and thought, this isn't as hard as I imagined. You weren't stronger than anyone else, but you understood yourself more. You weren't better than anyone else, but you no longer felt less. One afternoon, your sister-in-law asked, "Do you ever miss your single days?" You smiled, then answered honestly, "Sometimes. But I don't want to go back." Back then, you had more time and more daydreams, but you also had more fear. Fear of judgment, fear of not being enough, fear of not being loved unless you perform just right. Now, you still get scared sometimes, but you allow yourself to be more real. One day, your mother-in-law asked you to teach your new sister-in-law how to marinate fish. You almost said, maybe you should do it instead. But then she gave you a nod. a silent go-ahead. So you stood up, washed your hands, and explained each step clearly. Your sister-in-law nodded, listened, and looked at you with quiet trust. You were surprised, because somehow you had become someone people looked to. That night, while mending an old cloak, you said to your husband, "I used to think being a wife meant enduring everything." He asked, "And now?" "Now I think being a wife just means living alongside, not having to swallow it all, just staying, being kind, and loving yourself a little too." He nodded, poured water into your cup, and teased, "You're starting to sound like an old woman." You laughed, "Not old, just grown up." He shook his head. "Grown up, but still snores." You replied, "Better that than grown up and still can't wash dishes." Both of you burst into laughter like kids. And you realized, growing up doesn't mean losing your softness. It just means you no longer have to pretend. You can be a wife, a daughter-in-law, or someone who nags her husband for leaving shoes everywhere, but also someone who says, "I need a break. I need a hug. I need some quiet." You're no longer the just married girl. You're a wife, just enough. Not perfect, but real. And that, you found, is more than enough. Tonight, the wind has changed. You lie on the old bed, beside the man who once made you blush by accidentally touching your hand. The oil lamp flickers quietly on the wooden table. The scent of stove ash drifts in through the door crack, and the wind whistles gently through the thatched roof, as if lulling old memories long past to sleep. You turn over, watching him sleep. Messy hair, an arm slung across his forehead like always, snoring faintly after spending the afternoon repairing the chicken coop under the mist. You smile, just a little. You don't want to wake him, not because you're afraid, but because you care. You remember that first night, so silent you could hear your heartbeat. That night, when even the slightest movement made you worry if you were being a proper wife. And then the nights passed. Some tense, some lonely, some joyful. Somewhere, the two of you slept facing opposite directions like strangers forced to share the same haymat. But still, two people, staying and breathing out the day's weight and moving forward gradually. No one taught you how to be a wife. No one taught you how to love someone unfamiliar, yet share a bed. No one showed you how to hold on to yourself amid blankets, kitchen fires, glances, feedback, and the thousands of expectations weighing down your small shoulders. You learned bit by bit. Stumbling, guessing, failing, correcting. You used to think you were weak, but really, you just hadn't yet discovered where your strength lay. You used to think love had to look like the stories others told. But it turns out that love can also arrive quietly, in the form of a shared roasted sweet potato, or the silence kept at the right moment. And in the end, you did it. You turned a strange house into a home, turned a stranger into a companion, turned a role into real life. You're no longer afraid of the night. I am no longer tense with the question, will something be expected of me tonight? No longer lying stiff like firewood, holding your breath, waiting for someone to reach for you. You lie down as yourself. You sleep, not from exhaustion, but from peace. You live, without trying to prove you're the perfect wife, the obedient daughter-in-law, the ideal woman as carved out in brittle old books. And you understand now, marriage isn't where people come to endure each other. It's where they learn to understand, to give, to laugh when things don't go right, and rest beside each other. You gently touch your husband's hand. No words, no waking. Just to be sure, you're no longer lying beside a stranger. Then you close your eyes. The wind outside softens. The steady breath next to you is the calmest melody you've ever known. And you drift into sleep, as light as the first time you realized. To be a wife doesn't mean to be afraid. It means learning how to live genuinely, without someone teaching you. And then, morning will come again. You'll light the stove again, wash the vegetables, hang out the blankets, argue over whether the rice is undercooked or not. But one thing will be different. You won't feel small anymore. Because you've come such a long way, from a shy girl, scared on her wedding night, to a woman who can smile when asked, "Why don't you have kids yet?" You didn't run away. You didn't disappear. You learned how to live truthfully, and still gently. Maybe no one will ever tell the story of your life. Your name won't be written in history books. But you are irreplaceable in someone's heart. Maybe your husband's, mother-in-law's, or your own. And I believe that women like you, no matter the era, deserve to be cherished. If you've listened to the end, thank you so much for staying. If these stories have touched you even a little, don't forget to like the video so I know you're there, and subscribe so you won't miss the next journey. I make these videos to help you fall asleep and remind you that you are not alone. Wishing you a peaceful night. Sleep well. And I'll see you again in soft, weightless dreams in the following video.